Twitch stream.
No stress.
Just making sure everything's coming through all good. Sweet, we're live. All right, guys, we're live for episode 148 of the High Performance Podcast. Nearing that big 150. I hate to say it's another milestone, but it's a fucking another milestone.
Everything's a milestone. We're like those people, you know those girls where they want to celebrate like your 3-month, your 6-month, your 9-month anniversary? We're the podcast of that.
Every time you turn up 5 minutes ahead of time, that's a milestone.
It is. It's true. I've been better this year.
Anyway, Angus, do you want to introduce our guest today?
All right, so for this episode, it's a long-awaited guest.
Yeah, long-awaited.
At least for me. And actually, no, a bunch of our regular listeners will be followers of Melbourne Strength Culture and Jamie Smith. So got Jamie Smith. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Mate, and to follow up from our Instagram conversation last night, I did my trap bar deadlifts today. Pants, blood-free.
Blood-free, that's a win. That's a big win.
And I got to say, like, Angus, I briefly touched on him yesterday. I'm like, fuck, I swear I've got a hemorrhoid. And he ran away from me like I have measles. I was like, relax, mate. You can't
I don't like hearing about it. I'm scared of aging. And Oscar's had so many old man dramas lately. Like, just general retirement from competitive sport due to countless injuries. He had this dry eye socket, so he had to start lubricating his eyes every 60 minutes.
Got the drops in my pocket.
And now he's got bloody hemorrhoids. You're 1 foot in the grave.
Okay, so this is how I got it. So at first I was like, fuck, I didn't even lift that heavy on Monday. And I was like, I eat pretty well, and I realized I've had the man flu, and I fucking had a real bad coughing fit on Sunday, and I felt so much intra-abdominal pressure, and I like farted, and I was like, wow, that's probably what did it.
That's right. Jamie's been up on the Sunshine Coast. I believe he went there on a trip to sort of research how geriatrics should take care of themselves.
Yeah, that's it. I've got plenty of inside scoop.
Yeah, what have you got for me?
It's essentially God's waiting room up there. Yeah. It is a lovely place to relax.
Well, give me some advice regarding hemorrhoids first. You're a power lifter.
I personally have never had one. So Charlie Athanasiou, we actually did a podcast on this, but he's my full-time. So he works with me at Strength Culture. We're the two full-timers there. And he was on the platform at the Sydney Expo this year, and he farted in his last warm-up for his squats, and he actually tweaked his back because he reckons...
That's so heavy.
Right, it was so funny. So we had a podcast with Will Crozier and Dean McKillop, and they were down in Melbourne. And our podcast is it used to be a proper shit talk, and we've just started filming it.
Nice. Yeah, it looks good.
We called it quarter pounder fart because Charlie reckons he had Macca's the day before because he was so far underweight, and he reckons that the Macca's, the quarter pounder, just sort of like wasn't sitting well in his stomach. He farted and then tweaked his back in his warm-up and only got a 2 kilo PR after that.
A PR's a PR. Last night, like I silly had Guzman and Gomez for lunch yesterday, and like all through my night sessions last night, I was like in pain trying to hold in a fart, and my clients are like, "What's wrong with you?" I was like, "Nothing." Just like grimacing.
Just let him out. You gotta get him.
I should have, yeah. After I did a bit more research, apparently that's a bad thing. But anyway, you know what? Today I feel 100%. So, hemorrhoid ain't that bad.
I'm fucking filthy. Wednesday's usually my cruisy day, but I listen to bloody one Luke Tulloch podcast on budgeting. I stop Ubering it everywhere, and then I bloody screw a pair of joggers trekking through the rain to get here. So, gonna have to refine that. Got a little bit overzealous with my budgeting attempts.
Anyway, let's get into
We've got
this
a lot
interview
to cover because I know there's at least 3 things we need to get through, and there's probably more that'll come up through this. First up, I should give a shout out to my girlfriend. That's part of the reason that this is happening right now as far as this podcast. Probably would have had Jamie on later in the year, but basically about 6 months ago, she heard me raving about Melbourne Strength Culture, and part of my birthday surprise, she was like, "Oh, I'll take you to Rockpool. It's my favourite restaurant." And I thought she meant the one in Sydney. Turns out for my birthday, flew me down to Rockpool, Melbourne to have dinner at my favourite restaurant, but then also booked me in a consult with one of my favourite coaches, Jamie Smith. So shout out to Trinity for the ultimate stitch up. I don't know what I'm going to have to put together for her birthday in January, but it's going to have to be thoughtful and expensive. I am so fucked.
So what's your question?
The question is, well, I just wanted to do that. It
was cool.
It was a crazy gift. Like that was absolutely ridiculous.
We got to spend some good time together. It was nice.
That's the good. It's always good when hopefully you had some laughs with things. It's always good.
It was emotion. I experienced every emotion on the spectrum.
All right, take us through the session then. Let's talk about how Jamie trains.
Well, we didn't really. We just assessed me.
Oh.
Well, we talked for about 45 minutes, and then we did an assessment, and we explained the assessment.
Yeah.
And then we did some squatting. That was about it.
Yeah.
And a bit of bench. We did some bench press.
Sort out my bench press. How much can you bench right now?
Me?
Yeah.
I've been using the multi-grip bench and I've been just doing close group. I failed 90 twice last week.
That's heavy. You're not a man.
No,
But first off the bat, now that I've got that out of the way, we will get a bit into the things that I learnt off Jamie Smith specifically in our session. But originally, you did want to come on here to clear your name. Woodford was talking mad shit about you and how you got sacked from your first gig. What's the deal? Do you just not know how to coach athletes, or?
Woody. Nah, so yeah, I was listening. Someone told me that he was talking about me on obviously your podcast, because he does like to. He's one of my. If I had a Mount Rushmore of influences in my not just personal career but my life, he'd be on there. My parents would be the two biggest faces. Woodford would be up there. I'd put Eric Cressey on there, and I'd probably put John Paul Cowkey as well.
Nice.
Who was my first coach. Yeah, but if I had a Mount Rushmore, I don't even know how many faces are on Mount Rushmore. But if I had 5 up there, that would be the people. But Woodford is definitely there. But you've spoken to him. He's just a nutcase.
It was chaos. He literally checked himself out of rehab and came straight to my parents' house for a podcast.
He's one of a kind. And it's exactly, everyone always asks me, like, is he the same as what he is, like, on all this media sort of stuff?
Yes.
Podcasts, and he's legit the same. It doesn't matter if it's one-on-one in a room, outside on the street. If he's driving past in his Jeep, he'll bang out the window. He's like, "Hi, Tyro!"
Dude, it was crazy because he Ubered it to my house, and you know how the stereotype is people are like, "Oh fuck, my Uber driver wouldn't stop talking to me." He had the door open, and he's still just yapping his Uber driver's ear off. Like the guy could not get him out of the car. He had a new best mate. It was fucking wild.
He's unreal. Yeah, and somebody told me that he was talking about me on the podcast, and I was like, I'm gonna have to tune in and have a listen to him. And it was a long-winded, like 30-minute story that had about 400 interruptions, and I finally got to the point where he tried to explain what happened to me at the start of my career in strength and conditioning, and it was just completely butchered. So I messaged the page. I was like, "Boys, I need to come on and clear my name." And then you were coming down to Melbourne for the session, so I had to. And then we set this up, obviously, but his recollection of the order of events was just completely wrong. So it was, just Woodford being Woodford, really. He wasn't saying any shit about me. It was just probably incorrect, really.
Nah, that's all love. So what happened? You graduated from university. What was your coaching experience at this point? You're just coaching a few mates, or?
Yeah, so I started personal training pretty much straight out of school. My
mum first?
No, I was at Recreation, actually. I don't know if you guys got up in Sydney. But
is that a big chain?
It's not a big... There's probably about 4 or 5 of them. But they're big gyms. They're similar size to Fitness First. Big classes, like 2-story gyms, like just big gyms. Two women own them as like not a franchise, but they just own all of them. I think they own all of them, but it doesn't really matter. I started personal training pretty much straight out of school because my parents had threatened to make me pay rent if I didn't either have a full-time job or was studying. So I started my certs, as most people do, just got it out of the cereal box, and moved on from there through just personal training at Recreation for about 6 to 12 months. This is when I was about 19, and then I moved to a small studio just in a quite wealthy area of Melbourne, and was just making a silly amount of money for being 20 years old as a personal trainer, which was pretty cool. I got to experience some cool shit working there for a little while. And that was, in that process, I started my undergrad at Deakin University, just of sports and exercise science. So I was working as a personal trainer, and then my goal, as with, I would say 95% of new personal trainers' goals, was to work with elite athletes. It just sort of felt like the general sort of progression for the career in any sort of exercise science or exercise prescription field. So I started working towards trying to get a placement position at the end of my degree where you are required to do your hours with an AFL club. That was my goal. So everything I did for the next 3 to 4 years was to set myself up with a position at the end of my university degree to work with an AFL club. And I got there. So I did an undergrad with Deakin. I was doing personal training. I was working with some private athletes just that I picked up, a couple of like downhill skiers and some local footy players and just local athletes and all that sort of stuff. And then I did a year with Port Melbourne Football Club in the VFL as their strength coach in 2013, 2013, I think it would be. And it got to the point where I then applied to work at an AFL club. I don't really want to say the club's name, but
was it
the Swans?
Did he get the club right at least?
Yeah, he got the club right.
Do some
digging.
So if you want to
there.
I've heard this. Yeah, I know exactly who it was. Was that your team you supported as a kid?
No, it wasn't who I supported, but it's just I don't like to. There's no point talking shit. But
so you don't have the burn every bridge approach that Woodford has.
Definitely not. Nah. I like my bridges. He burns them while he's on them. He burns them in front of him. He burns them behind him. He's got a flamethrower through a bloody bridge factory. But so I started looking to get that position with an AFL club, and I was applying for my third year placement position to work as an intern with the AFL system. And through that interview process, they asked, "Oh, you're actually got some decent qualifications under your belt." I'd done some ASCA level stuff as well, level 1 and level 2. And they were like, "Oh, do you mind applying for the head strength position of the VFL team as well? It'll be a paid position." I was like, "Oh, definitely. If you guys think I'm capable, I'd love to apply for that as well." So they sent me the application, what I needed to set up for them, and an annual plan and how I would structure the preseason and all that sort of stuff. And I did all this work and I started applying. So I was in the application process for both of them, the paid position with the VFL and the intern position with the AFL. And I was successful in both, which was awesome. And I had achieved my original goal of working in elite sport S&C straight off the bat, straight coming out of my last year of university. And I was like, oh, this is the dream. I'm going to be in an AFL club. This is what I want. This is money. This is the lights of strength and conditioning in Australia. I got there. I did 10 weeks. I got fired from the AFL position as an intern. And then that, as a result, made me lose my position with the VFL club It was pretty stupid. I wish I still had the email.
How destructive are you if you weren't even getting paid and they're like, we still got to can this guy?
No, so I got told that I was too involved in progressing my career to be an intern. I was told that my personality was too strong to work in the environment of the AFL club.
They just want someone submissive that the coach can boss around and essentially coach through.
Exactly. So the way I took it out of it was the person who had hired me for the AFL position didn't like that I was also in a paid position working my way into the club because I was involved in the sports science department of AFL and then also the strength and conditioning department purely for the VFL. So I was trying to talk to the AFL S&C coaches and all that sort of stuff, and I just got told pretty much that you're too worried about progressing your career and not involved enough in this internship, which, man, I had dropped everything to go and do that. I lost about half my business to go there. I was doing about 15, 20 hours of unpaid work there a week just to be with it, and I thought, this is stupid. And not just that, I got into the AFL club, and I was like, this can't be the pinnacle of S&C in Australia. I couldn't believe it. There's players on $700,000, $800,000 who are just walking off the park being like, oh, I'm just done for the day. I'm like, what? This is your job.
Yeah. We'll take it for
somebody. There's this illusion that once you're at the top that it is all professional. But I even see it in the UFC, guys with their weight cuts and things like that. Some sports is just an absolute shit show. And the S&C side of things is always the last thing to come to the table in any sport.
Yeah, and it is a means to an end. At the end of the day, strength and conditioning is not the sport. It's not what they get paid for. Yeah, we can, us as coaches can swing dicks around as much as we want about being optimal with our performance and doing this, this, and this. But there's always be athletes. I don't know if you watch what LeBron James does when he does his training, but there's always going to be athletes that are just better than everyone else, and it doesn't matter what you give them. Just don't injure them, and you'll be fine. So S&C, it isn't in that elite sector. It's just not the glitz and glam that I really thought it was going to be. And obviously they didn't think I was good enough for them either. So I got moved on, and then I just swung gears and went straight into private sector and went hard, and that's where we are now.
How old were you when you got the job with the AFL or VFL?
I would have been 22.
That's young. How old are you now?
27.
You've done well. I gotta say, I read through your, as I do with all our guests, go through everyone's IG, and after I was finishing wiping the tears from my eye when you posted the reasons why not to have a gym, because people hit you up all the time. What are the benefits of having a gym? Like, can we make people feel better about the situation? Because that was a good post, really good post.
There was a lot of shit that I'd never thought about. I was like, it's really cemented my position of fuck that.
Yeah.
It's not even, I mean, it's not even just I think it's just a small business in general. Like, people think, there's so many pros, don't get me wrong, so many pros to owning your own thing and running and calling your own shots and working your own schedule and hustling yourself, Gary V mindset. But I think just small business in general, until you're in it and you sort of see just what is actually involved, it's a bit harder than what most people would think.
Because that's not what people necessarily sign up for. Like, you get into it because of you're passionate in your field, but you're not necessarily passionate about business, maybe.
Well, that's literally it. So we're just over 3 years in now at Strength Culture, and the people ask me all the time, so like, what do you wish you knew at the start? And it would literally be accounting. Fuck me, if my mum didn't run my dad's business for 30 years and couldn't do like just general accounting for a small business, I would be broke. I would be done. We wouldn't have lasted 12 months. There's this thing called a BAS statement, which I'd never heard of, which just every 3 months it just comes in and just cleans my account. I'm like, that's fantastic. See you later. But there's like all this sort of stuff that But the post was geared towards, because at the end of the year we're holding our first Strength Culture Congress, which is just an excuse to get everybody together and really promote some things that we don't really normally talk about through our stream. So I'm talking about my fitness business blunders, and part of that is like this whole list and that's just like, I could write 100-point list if I wanted to, but there's just so many things involved with owning a gym or owning a small business that people just wouldn't be aware of, and that was just to shed a little bit of light on there and to also just like inspire hopefully some ticket sales for it. But there are plenty of positives to running a gym. I think if you look at, I'm a big believer that success leaves clues, and all of the coaches that I aspire to be in the private sector, the big ones that jump out for me are Eric Cressey, for obvious reasons, and I'm sure we can talk about that at some point today. But also Mike Boyle would be another one. Christian Woodford, in terms of Australia and Melbourne. And I look at like the JPS guys down here in Melbourne currently are really, really pushing themselves really well. All the guys that I see as sort of like the pinnacle and the top, and the guys that I want to be in the private sector, they all own a gym, they all own a business, they all have coaches underneath them that are very successful and very driven and very good, and there's a big community around it. So I think that's probably the biggest thing for myself, for a selfish reason, is that I wanted... is the benefit of having that environment around me constantly. Because I first felt it when I went to Cressey. It's almost like getting into like a time warp of just like a hotbed of an oven of education and self-education and communication and all that sort of stuff. And everybody's just spitballing ideas constantly, and you just accelerate your learning because you're just surrounded by people that are pushing the same sort of idea. So there's a lot of benefits to owning a gym. There's just a lot of headaches too.
One of the things you were talking about on your own podcast the other day was just how you've witnessed so many gym owners around you in your area try to expand probably a little bit prematurely. And I think because that's such a common theme in the fitness industry, everyone's obsessed with rapid growth, like 10x your business in a year sort of thing. Whereas, and you've seen it, like, there's such an elastic response often. A rapid growth leads to rapid contraction. And then I guess some of the strategies 100%. You've thought about growing your business, that sort of shape that now, right? Going down more a content creation route rather than just opening up a strength culture gym on every corner.
Yeah. So again, success leaves clues. You look at most gyms that have tried to do it. In Australia, JPS opened up their second place in Port Melbourne. Lasted about 12 months. They retracted back down to 1. Woodford went gangbusters to about 5 or 6.
Seems like the Woodford thing to do, though. I hope he tries again.
No, I hope he does. The stories he's told me about that process, just no. I don't think he would no longer be in the public eye. But the same thing, he went 3 or 4 gyms within the space of about 2 years and retracted back down to 1. I look at Cressey over in America, who I see as the gold standard of private sector. And they took, I think it was like 9 years to open their second gym down in Florida. A very calculated decision to do that. They're both doing really well. But then even Mike Boyle, I think only has 2 gyms. DeFranco even tried to upscale, went to Texas with On It. Shit at the fan. See you later, DeFranco. Back down to he's in a smaller warehouse style gym. I think it's more like a studio-esque thing. He's got his podcast room on the side, but it's just a common theme that these sort of I don't want to toot my own horn, but these beds of actual educated people. Not talking about RBT gyms and F45s or anything like that, but where there's a group of educated coaches together, it just seems to be the trend that there's only one gym of them. And it was my initial plan to be Melbourne Strength Culture, we're going to sell structured strength and conditioning to sub-elite athletes, and then educated strength training to the population. That was my initial plan. Put Melbourne on it, put one in Sydney, put one in Perth, put one everywhere. And then after about 12 months of running a small gym, I was like, there is no way I'm expanding. I'm just going to solidify what I've got and really try and condense and construct something that we can then express online more so. And that's where we currently are. I'm not going to go any bigger than where we were. Angus, you came to the gym. I think it's a great size. We're really happy with it. We can expand within it. There's lots of little areas we can move within our little factory there. And my dad's a builder, so he can knock up walls and all that sort of shit if we need it. But the goal, I don't think for us, and I don't think for many places anymore. I speak to the JPS guys pretty consistently. Sam Skeffis there. The plan is just grow online. That's where most expansion is going to come from. Education stream, our seminar content, and all that sort of stuff. That's where the real growth I see within our industry is right now, because so many people are jumping in with these shitty education foundations, and they just don't know what the fuck's going on, and they don't know how to really help people. So we're going to step into that world with our online.
Going back to Cressey, I wanted to go up to the Cressey. Sorry, he's in Boston earlier this year, and I wanted to go to the facility, but I didn't realize how far out of Boston it was.
Hudson.
So quite a way. But yeah, it's a world-renowned facility, and the fact that there's only 2, I assume he'll want to sort of transform that into an IMG academy or maybe something like that. It looks like where it might head, but it's just so well known. It's why? I guess you have to want more to keep
why
progressing.
dilute it?
Yeah, but why? Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, well, I think there's that process that they've gone through at CSP. I think is again, I'm biased, but I see it as the gold standard of the way in which to build not just your name as a private sector coach, but to build a successful business. They're well respected. I've never met any coach or any athlete or anybody that has ever said a bad word about their business, about their coaching model, about any of that sort of stuff. They are just a pure professional unit of coaches. And it doesn't need Cressey's name on there to see that it is what it is. Everybody respects it. And for them having 2 gyms now is, I know that the expansion was a deliberate decision, because there's a lot of major league clubs down there in Florida, in Jupiter, Florida, who have their off seasons there. That's why they went down there. It's an educated decision to move into that direction, almost purely from a business standpoint. But it's I don't know why you would aspire to have multiple gyms as a private sector coach who's looking more so to build a brand and build all that sort of stuff. You just don't need it. Hudson, Mass. Sure, it's 45 minutes west of Boston. There's one highway to get there. There's nothing in the town,
pretty
and then there's
grim
just
in the middle of
vast
city, in the middle of winter. Sorry.
Yeah, that's where I was when I did the internship.
Yeah, I got to say, Eric Cressey's so professional that he decided not to come on this podcast to ruin his professionalism. I have reached out to him, and he politely declined.
Oh, did he actually say no?
Yeah.
Dude, I respect the fuck out of
no
him.
Yeah, he says no to everything.
He says no to everyone. He's got a website
Yeah.
that he goes on, and he'll search up your podcast. He'll find out how many hits you have, and if it's not within a threshold, he doesn't
Fuck.
go.
It must be pretty big because I don't want
It's
to toot out
literally,
on her. We got some good downloads.
We're practically
No, I'm just
fitness
kidding.
Rogans of Australia.
I'm just kidding.
You'll get there, but he literally does that, and he's like, it's
he
not
does
a
no podcast,
there's no
yeah.
like emotional thing. It's literally just if you're not within this threshold, and he's like, the longer I'm in my career, the threshold
Yeah.
just goes up.
Like
up. And now he's got his own.
and I think his threshold's pretty much at Rogan now, and that's it because I don't see him go on many podcasts.
Well, you have to watch your personal saturation as well, you know.
Yeah, correct. I think when you're entering the market, you've got to go hard, and then it's like Jeff Nippard when we had him on, and he was a great episode for us, and then he got to that level, and he's like, "Look, I've got my own now that I do with Mountain Dog," and he goes, "And then that's it. That's all I'm working on," and it's smart because people are going to you direct.
Yeah, it's nothing personal against you guys at all. Because people have asked him to come to like do international seminars and stuff. And he's like, I just don't do it. Doesn't matter what they pay me. It's not worth not being with my family. It's not worth all that sort of
I
stuff.
respect it.
It's not. Yeah, he just does what
I'm
he does.
keen now to get into some more specific training talk or talking about the human body and stuff because Jamie caught me at a good time where like, you know, I'm working with General Pop. I've just subscribed to Hype Gym's Patreon. I'm on my Pat Davidson Power Hour. I've gone down the rabbit hole. I've got clients that just want to lose a bit of weight. Meanwhile, I'm trying to measure their infrasternal angle. Can you talk about, like, let's talk about sort of like, you know, what these sort of PRI techniques and things like that are useful for and sort of, I don't know, help us sift through the weeds of this sort of situation. Like what's important, what's helpful for most people, and then what's sort of, you know, going too deep down the rabbit hole. Because like exactly what you posted the other day, because I was such a knees out focused squatter for so long, and then I get in front of these guys, and all of a sudden I swing back the opposite way. I'm out for Kelly Starrett's head. Like, how do you sort of maintain an even keeled approach when you're confronted with all this stuff?
I was lucky because I was in America for 6 months at that initial start of my career where I was like, I need information, I need education, I need this. And then I entered the Cressey internship, and it was just like, whoa, let's cut all this shit around the outside. Let's find the gold in the middle, and let's just deliver gold. So I was lucky that I was molded into my sort of when my systems were being developed by somebody who had already been so
seen it all.
Far down. Yeah, seen it all. He's so far into his progression of his systems and all that sort of stuff. So I was lucky in that sense. And then I come back to Australia, and just going to America is sort of like going into the future by about 5 to 10 years in strength and conditioning. I came back to Australia, and nobody was talking about PRI. Nobody had heard of PRI. I had done 2 courses. I did one online, and then I did 3 courses. We did one of them online, and then I came back to Melbourne. And within about 6 months, they came to Sydney, I believe. It was about 3 years ago. And Charlie and myself flew up for 2 weekends in a row to do 2 more courses.
Packed out room, or was it just like 10 to 15 people?
Decent. No, about
so
25 people,
buzz.
I would say. 25, 30. Yeah, there's a little bit. Most of them are clinicians.
Yeah.
There was probably Charlie, myself, and we took another strength coach up, Trent, and then maybe there was one other strength coach. Everyone else was like physios or chiros
now,
or
for
whatever.
people who hate acronyms, I've had a few people get salty at me. Postural Restoration Institute. That's PRI. Now we don't have to say it again.
Yeah. So, this was like 3 years ago. So I was first exposed probably 4 to 5 years ago by Quinn Hennock, just for the YouTube video that he posted. And then I went to America. They were all talking about it. Came back and did 2 courses. And I was like, I was in that, wow, this is awesome. I can change anything. I can get rid of somebody's hip pain, shoulder pain, back pain, you name it.
Bro,
knee pain,
cure AIDS
internal
with
roads.
some just nice diaphragmatic breathing.
Hemorrhoids.
Everyone needs hemorrhoids. Maybe not. Maybe adjusting some pressure there. You could probably reduce the
I
likelihood
think you just
of
need
it.
a
But
squatty potty.
I need to really round when I cough next time.
yeah, posterior
into my
expansion.
upper
You need
back.
some posterior.
Get a hemorrhoid out your back, out your spine.
It's called a disc bulge. And I was in that. Oh, PRI is going to fix and cure the world's issues. And then I got back to training, and I was running the gym and had a lot of assessments coming in, and I was getting some decent changes with a lot of people, like internal rotation fixes, thoracic flexion, shoulder flexion, ER, IR of the glenohumeral joint and all that sort of stuff. And I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And then like 12 months down, I was like, actually, you know what? Like there are some key things here, I think, for application of a strength coach. But for the most part, like, as you said, like we're dealing with people who like, they just want to function better. They don't want the knee pain. They don't want whatever. Like they're not going to sit there and do 30 minutes of a balloon breathing drill to get this benefit. Like I can probably just chase 1 or 2 quick drills and then just go on my way and chase some performance outcomes with my training prescriptions.
I still haven't had the balls to stick a balloon in my mouth on the gym floor yet. I still need a bit more time for that.
Everyone at Lift always posts like Will Berkman in different positions with a balloon. He's the sort of guy who has that sort of willpower, I think.
Yeah, Burke. So I sent Burke to a PRI guy up in Bondi because he came to our Sydney seminar, and the way he presented was left AIC, right BC, like textbook. And I was like, look, I just don't have the time right now to teach the right stuff. Not just that, I think he was probably a little bit too progressed down those patterns for me to really get big changes from my understanding of it all. So I sent him to a guy in Bondi, and that's why he's been doing those things. He said he's been feeling better, so it'll be interesting to see how his next sort of heavy phases go. But yeah, the PRI stuff. So postural restoration.
I was just about to say, because that's interesting, because and again, this is just like the sound bites that I've got from it so far, my early exposure to it. The whole idea that I thought the left AIC BC pattern was more of a gen pop thing, hadn't really been trained. And then the idea that someone like Will, who I would expect, to be, how long has he been powerlifting for? Like 5 to 6 years now. And based on everything that's been explained to me, I would expect him by this point just to be sort of bilaterally extended.
PEC. Yeah. So, I mean, the way the PRI will teach you is that everybody is left AIC. It's just human nature. Right diaphragm dome is a little bit more efficient, stronger, bigger than the left diaphragm dome. It throws a slight rotation through the trunk. It puts us sort of deep into our right hip and puts more of our center of mass onto the right foot more often than not. And then that's where the sort of counter rotation will come from the pelvis, from the rib cage, and you sort of get into this right BC pattern. So left ARC, right BC, they sort of go together. But again, they're just acronyms for the sake of throwing out acronyms. And I know you guys had Kyle Dobbs on a few weeks ago, and I think I would put him and myself in a very similar position. I know he's a lot more progressed with his career, but we've sort of been around a lot of these things for a few years now. So PRI I was exposed to 4 years ago properly when I was at Cressey. The SFMA seminars as well, the level 1 and level 2 are very popular for good reason. I think they're a really, really good general screen, selective functional movement assessment, a really good screen for strength coaches to understand and how to apply sort of assessment strategies to better understand passive and active range of motion and maybe where some of the deficits lie for some of your functional capacity. And I know Kyle, and back to what I was saying with Kyle, he's been in the industry long enough to realize that none of these guys, what they're selling, like these system entities, these entities of like movement, they sell movement strategies or they sell assessment strategies or any of these sort of things. Nobody has gold. There's no real gold left in, there's nothing creative coming out. They're just reshaping and remolding past and previous principles in a way that they've found better methods to express and apply them to certain populations. And PRI, I believe, is exactly the same. There's a couple key principles that you could take away from their courses, but you don't have to just purely apply it within their method and their framework of how to sell it. There's plenty of ways that you can adjust somebody's position to change their center of mass between right and left sides. And you don't have to do it with this breathing drill where your head's tilted 30 degrees to the left and you're in through your nose, hold your exhale and find your left adductor. Like it's just like there's plenty of ways to go through this. And I think Kyle has a really, really good way of doing that, where it's principle driven. Understand the principles and you can really apply this. It becomes magic. You can apply it to any drill or any exercise anywhere.
So as far as principles that you've derived from PRI, is that I hear you say proximal to distal a lot. Is that something that you derived from PRI, or is that something you find is common across a lot of these courses?
A lot of them. So proximal before distal is SFMA like 101. And and that is that the proximal structure will dictate more so what the distal structure is expressing. A lot of that comes down from Stuart McGill. I don't know if you know who Dr. Stuart McGill is. Yeah, so a lot of his earlier research was to do with that, being that like core stiffness, or his was spinal stiffness specifically, allows for more more distal mobility to be expressed or performance to be expressed. I think the research they did was on throwing a punch and having how stiff the core was how hard the punch was. So the stiffer the core, the harder the punch, the more lax the core, the softer the punch. So, and it kind of makes sense. Like, I'm sure, if you've ever thrown a ball, like if you're trying to throw a ball and you're all this floppy thing, like it just doesn't really work. You stiffen up, you brace up, you land into the floor hard, like you stiffen that front leg up. Like you can generate so much more force into the ground and then throw a ball or a javelin or whatever so much further. So that proximal to distal understanding sort of started with Stuart McGill and his research, and then SFMA picked it up. But PRI talk about the same thing. They talk about sort of like before you go and address glenohumeral joint, you need to address scapulothoracic and rib cage. And before you address rib cage, you need to address what's on the inside of the rib cage, lung and pressure and all that sort of stuff within the thoracic cavity, within the abdominal cavity. So it's just a common theme that pops up with most. Again, there's no gold in any one system, but a lot of them come with this sort of progression of proximal preceding the distal performance or the outcome.
Going back to what you were saying about stiffness of the spine, of the core, I think that's interesting from a performance perspective, because I've also heard from a lot of people, people who are really conscious about their posture and trying to hold themselves in a certain way. That can also lead to like being too stiff all the time. Like, is that something that you see as a problem? Like when you're always trying to sort of hold yourself straight up and be rigid?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that would be where the idea of stiffness or stability has swung too far. The pendulum's gone too far, and maybe they've heard some out of context sort of application of it, being that posture may lead to pain or anything like that, or you see these people who are trying to move through what should be like a flowy movement, like a squat or something, and they've just got that much co-contraction of all their muscular system that they're limited in how they can actually perform the squat. But you probably need to just like drop down some of that, sort of like you're just too engaged from head up or the neck up within the movement itself. So you see it all the time that people will take one little small nugget of an idea out of context and then just, oh yeah, I need to apply this to everything. Well, hang on. Like, you don't need to brace and stiffen up everything when you pick up a 2 kilo box off the floor. That's just not how we live.
But
I don't know
but that's what OH&S systems would have you believe at the moment, with all those signs everywhere, probably leading to more people blowing out.
But then you get the fucking edgelords these days where they're like, oh, there's no research around certain postures preventing injury or everything, but it's like common sense would say that we don't want someone being like super hunched all day. So how do you sort of find a middle ground where you sort of let people be, but then also
there's a really good, and if you guys can get him on your podcast, I think you'd be doing yourself and your viewers a really good service. Is Greg Lehman, Dr. Greg Lehman. He actually was one of Stuart McGill's. Do you know who he is?
No, I haven't heard of him. No. Let me just Google. Does he have IG?
He was actually, yeah, he would. It would just probably be Greg Lehman. He was one of Stuart McGill's sort of little minions, so to speak. Not a great way to think about it, but he was researching with him as a chiropractor, and then he went back to physical therapy school, so physio, and became a physio as well. And he talks a lot about reconciling biomechanics with pain and that sort of, and this is where the discussion currently is on social media for some reason, that, as you said, Angus, biomechanics or positions don't really matter for pain or injury and all that.
At a certain point, it's like, would you ever tell if? And I'm cool with people rounding their back a bit in a deadlift. I think there's an intelligent and moderate approach to that. But then the people are like, oh, it doesn't matter. It's like, well, would you ever tell someone to lift with a more rounded back? Like, why not if that's the case? Like, it gives you a pretty sick mechanical advantage. Like, in theory, if you learnt from day one just with a super flexed spine, would that be problematic at a certain point?
So this is where, and this is where the big line in the sand comes, it's all context, obviously. Like, that's a stupid answer because everything is all context dependent. But he wrote a really good blog about when biomechanics matter. And there's 5 points to it. And I align with that from my anecdotal evidence of I work a lot with rehabilitation now as well, with athletes in rehab, and powerlifting would be my biggest thing. But from my anecdotal experience, and also looking at the research, I do like to do a little bit of research and look into some of the studies themselves, is that biomechanics, from a painful standpoint, that it doesn't quite make sense, but the research doesn't back it up. That the biomechanics really do matter for pain and injury as much as we want to believe that it does. The biggest rock when it comes to injuries and pain within lifting or within performance or within anything is probably load management and managing sort of training loads and training spikes and all that sort of stuff, and being more prepared to manage those loads. So as you said, Angus, a lifter who from day one learns to round their back when they deadlift, if their progression of strength across their career is somewhat consistent and not big spikes here, big drops here, 6 months off, they come back in, then they try for PRs just in the middle of volume blocks and all that sort of stuff. If it is a constant general progression of strength and application of load over time, they more than likely would be at the same amount of risk as somebody who's deadlifting with a exact, flat, neutral, quote unquote, spine. It just doesn't seem to match up the way we want. Load management is much more important than the actual positions that you're in.
Yeah, and conversely, like, we see these people, usually these are people that have previously had a big back blowout, and then they fix up their deadlift form, real schmick looking hip hinge, perfectly neutral spine, and those are often some of the people that I see with the most sensitive backs. Like, they're always so stressed about it. But then I guess that sort of starts moving away from that Stu McGill model of, like, always being related to your biomechanics and moving more into the sort of biopsychosocial.
The BPS model, yeah. So I'm doing a talk at the end of the year for the Australian Powerlifting Summit, and this is my entire talk is on this exact thing, how to better manage your athletes, looking at all of the possible perspectives that you need to look at. And this is the biggest thing, that as soon as you've got somebody who has gone through that traumatic period of being injured, there's so many factors, particularly with chronic pain. There's so many factors that are involved with that experience of what that lifter or what that person is going through. And the biomechanics is just one part of it.
Because it was interesting,
I think a lot of people,
when you were taking me through some drills and things like that, I'm so used to people just telling me, talking me through it, this is what you do, this is what you should be feeling, blah, blah, blah. But what was very different about your process, and I almost wasn't ready for it, you just constantly asking me questions, like asking me to think about, like, what am I feeling? And yeah, it was quite a different approach.
At the end of the day, that's what matters. So Pat Davidson has a really good viewpoint of it. It's not just what it looks like, but it's also what it feels like. Like, your biomechanics could be perfect, but if your hip hinge, as you said, is spot on from the external, me looking from a bird's eye view of how you're moving, is perfect, but then internally, you're feeling anterior hip pain, you're feeling a strain in your right QL, and you're feeling all of your load into your right foot. It's like, well, all right, this looks great, but the experience from the actual lifter, the person doing it, is completely off. So we need to tick both boxes of, number one, does it look good? And number two, does it feel good? And if it doesn't feel good, this is not the right way that you should be moving currently. I'm not saying that you're always going to be moving in the direction that I want you to move in. We should be fluid. We should have variability within our movement options, but it needs to tick both of those boxes. So my viewpoint as a coach needs to be correct, but then also your experience as a lifter needs to be in the right direction for what we want as the outcome. And that's really, really important. Yeah.
This would probably be a great time to segue into that next principle. So I guess first principle we've sort of covered today, proximal to distal. And then the other one that we spoke about a lot was the principle of variability and why it's important across a range of different aspects of our body. Like you were even comparing it to, like, you know, variability within what you can use for energy, for fuel, variability, like having internal, external rotation of the hip. Talk us through why it's important.
Yeah, so variability, it's another sort of buzz thing that's popped up, because PRI is starting to get some momentum. Kyle Dobbs driving it, definitely. Pat Davidson sort of stepping up his media game and getting on more podcasts, getting out there a little bit more with his ideas. And then I think the other one that's really started pushing it is Sean Noriega, a powerlifter. But it's really starting to enter the space now, and variability is a hot topic that everybody's talking about, and I think there's a slight misconception with what variability means from like a theoretical standpoint, and let's define it first. So variability within a system is having multiple options to get you to your outcome. So if your outcome is to squat to depth, you could achieve that with a more hinge pattern dominant position. You could achieve it with more knee flexion, and ankle dorsiflexion, and all that sort of stuff. So there's multiple options that you could choose to get down to squat depth. It doesn't have to look the same all the time. And that's the biggest thing that we need with variability, is that we have multiple options available to us at any point to achieve the task and to achieve the outcome. It's really, really easy to understand with like a single plane of movement, like a squat or a bench press or powerlifting. But then when we look at like a running or gait mechanics or jumping or slam dunking a basketball or whatever, the variability for those tasks needs to be a whole lot more. We can't just be able to score a basket with a right-handed layup. Like, we need multiple ways in which we can do that. So that would be what variability is, having multiple options available to us to perform the outcome or the task that we need. And the principle for that with our movement prescription is that if we're locked down in one plane of motion, if we are limited in rotation at the hip in ER or IR, if we only have 20 degrees to play with in either direction, so we have 40-degree window into external rotation and internal rotation, our movement variability is bottomed out. We really don't have many options. As soon as we need to achieve a position that requires 25 degrees of internal rotation at the hip, we don't have that there. We have to take 20 degrees from the hip, and then that extra 5 degrees of internal rotation has to come from somewhere else. So PRI, and the biggest thing about this, and sort of another thing that I would like to discuss, is this idea of relative joint movements or relative joint motions, is that PRI sort of talks about aligning the skeletal system a little more, definitely the axial skeleton, the proximal skeleton, but then also the appendicular skeleton and how that sort of communicates with the axial skeleton. So being the big hubs, the scapulothoracic joint, and then also like your SI joint, lumbopelvic complex. But aligning the bones in some form. So the easiest way we can talk about it would be hip flexion and anterior pelvic tilt. I think most people understand that when you roll the pelvis forward into anterior pelvic tilt, what you're actually doing, if you were to sit inside that joint, you're actually moving through hip flexion. And that should be pretty easy to understand. Yeah. If you dump your pelvis forward over your femoral head, you've actually closed off the amount of hip flexion that we can achieve. And that's where we get sort of FAI symptoms. If we're dumped into an anterior pelvic tilt and we're trying to move down into squatting depth or whatever, we've got the femur coming up, we've got the pelvis already closed forward at the front, and we just don't have much hip flexion range. Whereas if we could roll the pelvis back and create a posterior pelvic tilt, we allow more hip flexion to occur. So we've changed the variability of that joint from a sagittal plane sort of standpoint just by moving the proximal structure on the distal structure, being the femoral head.
That was what we went through with me as well. Like, I passed my knee to wall, couldn't get my knees to go as far forward as I wanted in a squat, but like when you pointed it out, I was already starting in a bit of dorsiflexion, just the way that I stacked my body. So like starting with my knees 2 centimeters forward, I only had about another 5 left.
Yeah. So again, this would be exactly the same thing. So ankle dorsiflexion, when we talk about assessments, we need to assess what is the passive range of motion potential that we have. This is by far the biggest rock when it comes to any assessment process. How much range of motion do the actual structures allow me to do? So for you with your ankle dorsiflexion range, it's quite easy to assess.
But it was possible.
Yeah, but most people would have done it. You just kneel at a wall and you drive your foot as far forward as you can and try and get your foot further and further back from the wall. Most people should have about 10 centimeters clearance from the wall. You probably had 8. To me, that's still
possible.
Very manageable. Exactly. We can still do most of the tasks of squatting and whatever we need in the gym. So your passive range is there. But But then when we go to stand you up and get you to squat down, your knees don't move forward. They don't translate forward. So your center of mass, your body has to shift backwards. It's the only way it can happen. If you can't go forward, for you to achieve the task of getting your hips down, you have to move back and down. And that's where we get this big hinge pattern. So my idea would be that, all right, so if we can't get the knees forward, we're hitting that block. So we need to start you in more plantar flexion. So we need to find a way we can do that. The easiest way to do that is wedge your heels. Put something under your heels, start you in 5 degrees of plantar flexion, which allows you to access an extra 5 degrees of dorsiflexion on your way down. Or we can just regulate your body's center of mass and base of support to get your tibias back a little bit and create a heel wedge without wedging your heels. And then all of a sudden we can now translate better depth because we're allowing the knees to come forward. The passive range is there. We have the potential to get to depth. We just need to understand how to better align some of these structures to allow that passive range to be expressed in active performance. Yeah.
Have you applied any of these principles to anything other than sort of around powerlifting? Like, have you started to apply it to running? Have you started to apply it to anything else? Because I've noticed like guys like bar running and a few other guys like Jake Tura have sort of tried, not the same principles, but applying these things to sprinting and jumping, even though jumping is all over the place.
Yeah. So, and I spoke to Angus about this. PRI can be boiled down to two sort of subcategories of movement. Number one would be breathing, how we are breathing, the strategies that we're utilizing to get air in and out of our system, to cycle air and go through gas exchange. And then number two would be walking and mechanics of walking and sensory sort of awareness around us. So breathing and walking are probably the two biggest ones. So a lot of the concepts that they talk about within their courses is for that exact thing, like walking mechanics and gait cycle and how we're connecting with the floor. I know have you guys had David Gray on? I'm not sure if you have.
I've done two sessions with him, but I think in October he'll be on.
October.
Yeah, so he would be able to go into that side of things so much more than I can, because that's not where I apply the knowledge consistently. For myself personally, I really just apply it to lifting and how we're moving in the gym, and educating guys a little bit more how they can maybe apply some of it with their day-to-day life. But for myself, the application is mainly just powerlifting and lifting. But there would be a lot of guys. There's a guy out there called Miguel Aragon-Salo, Migsy Bogues on Instagram. He does a lot of running, sprinting mechanics and all that sort of stuff. And he's very, very deep within the PRI framework of applying those sort of things. So
I'm so glad I'm not in the sprinting world.
It's
every coach hates every other coach. Everyone's doing it wrong. No one knows how to get anyone fast. What are you doing?
I think it's too much for the sprinting realm. Like, the fast guys are going to be fast guys still. It might prevent injury, but in my opinion, I don't know. Well, no one's really cracked it on the head that this is a good way to do it, and it's gonna, when they do find that out, it'll really get popular.
I think all the stuff that, like, it's just if it makes them feel nice and it gets them out able to do a bit more, I think that's kind of the only sort of way they've found to implement it well, right? Like, I know a lot of Jake Tura stuff with the ISOs and with the breathing drills and stuff like that.
But even he has some weird ideas
good,
regarding landing and different landing drills, which I don't necessarily agree with, because obviously I'm biased from the John Evans camp.
Yeah.
But anyway,
one of the things... go on.
Just the thing with sprinting, like the pure sprinting, like the 100-meter, like the blue ribbon event sort of idea, is that you can get athletes, because the output is so much down that neuromuscular end, the adaptation just really isn't that great. Like, Usain Bolt would have probably run a sub 10 without training at some point in his life, just because he's Usain Bolt. Whereas when you start to move away from that heavy neuromuscular end of adaptation and start to move into like energy systems, strength training and all that sort of stuff, you can get such big changes with just applying good principles of training and all that sort of stuff. So the sprint world, I think it's always going to have that sort of cloud of, oh, this will work better, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, yeah, but at the end of the day, like, these guys are just going to be lightning quick, almost regardless of the way in which we make them run.
Yeah.
Like, we might shave 0.01 seconds off their time or whatever, but it is that genetic down that end of the spectrum that there's always going to be that confusion of this works for this guy, it should work for everyone. Well, not really.
With sprinting, I think it's a matter of just sprinting. Like, even I interviewed a Canadian sprinter, Aaron Brown. He'd never run before in basketball shoes. He ran 11.4 at the age of 13. And he's run like long to short, and he's run short to long, and he's run pretty much the same time for both like ways to train, supposedly. So I think if you're sprinting, if you're a lean, fit individual, maybe with sprint training, you can get a second quicker with spikes, learn how to use blocks, all that stuff. That's it. I think, like you said, you got to be fast to.
You've got to have it from the start. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think this will be a bit of a dip back into variability. I was just checking through my notes, like things I wrote down to talk about. I think one of the things that we briefly went over when you were assessing me, you were talking about, I think this ties into variability, just the amount of cardio that we put our youth through and like how that creates some dramas.
Yeah.
So what are you saying that like just do if you're doing heaps of cardio, you got to do a bit of weights and a bit of heavy stuff, or is that not quite what you're alluding to?
Well, it all comes down to what your goal is. There are definitely health benefits, and I think anybody would understand that from just doing some low-level cardio work. I think we were talking about Crozier and how he's on the push bike, or not on the push bike, on a spin bike at the moment because he just feels that he's unhealthy at the weight that he's at. And then he's doing about 150 minutes per week of just low-level, steady-state cardio because there are a lot of health benefits. And this is something that barbell medicine push a lot of, is that nobody is, just because you lift weights 4 days in the week for an hour and a half each session, doesn't inherently mean that you have all of the benefits of exercise from a health perspective. So there are a lot of health benefits from cardiovascular training that are outside of just this is interfering with my strength progression. But in terms of the variability thing, I think that what we were talking about was that from like a junior perspective, I haven't looked at the research. I know Woodford talks a lot about it, but from a junior perspective, I think a lot of what you give your junior athletes so a lot of the stimulus you throw at them when they're like young in those early teen stages sort of sticks with them for a bit longer. So if you run your athletes into the floor, because you're just, and this is Australian athletes really, we just have field-based sports where we just run them non-stop. We actually limit the amount of neuromuscular development that we can get and those strength adaptations and speed adaptations later on in their development. Whereas if you've got an athlete who has just done a whole lot of running and like sprinting and jumping and all that fast twitch sort of stuff when they're younger, we can actually mold them to be a little bit more fast twitch dominant as they progress through. And I know anecdotally, that's definitely something that I played a lot of basketball. I played football, but I was never good at it. But mine was basketball and athletics at school and volleyball would be the other one.
So you're doing
I played
some
a lot of.
Yeah, you'd be good.
Yeah, a lot of jumping. Fast twitch. I was fast twitch as. I was quick.
What was your time for 100?
I ran a 10.9.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, but I was 18. I think the timer was wrong. I would have been.
You got to be on the money here because people are going to reach out calling you out if they can't Google that shit.
Yeah. Because then I went to the next level and I got fucking my ass handed to me. So it would have been low 11s. But I was a sprinter. Yeah, I was a sprinter and triple jumper. And then I played a lot of basketball, but for myself. And then I entered strength training and I was just stronger than everyone. I didn't have much muscle. I still don't have a lot of muscle, but I just seemed to be decent at it. And again, that will come down to sort of my genetic makeup of my parents and all that sort of stuff. But I do believe that, all right, I was doing a lot more of that fast twitch work when I was a junior. I don't know the research too well, but I have heard that, yeah, we can sort of like outrun some of those strength adaptations from a junior perspective.
Interesting when people talk about like the whole idea of like fast twitch training, but like once you're moving fast, aren't you moving your like using your tendons a bit more and ligaments and things like that? Or do I not understand this stuff?
Yeah, tendon stiffness comes into it for sure. It sort of stores a lot of elastic power, and depending on your makeup of the angle at which your muscle belly runs down into your tendons can affect that as well.
Yeah.
Like those big blocky muscles, like calves and stuff, generally aren't the ones that are winning the 100-meter race.
That is the only developed muscle on my body.
The calf.
Yeah, I'm so useless.
Well, have you ever seen
athletically.
it's an amazing shot of Usain Bolt in the blocks and his calf is like here and his Achilles is like here.
It's just massive. Yeah, like all the basketballs are the same. Like they're all just long, slender. Like
Westbrook.
they're springy. Yeah, exactly.
Very high
Durant,
calf.
like you can actually see when he snaps his Achilles. But the same thing, like they're just long, slender muscles that store elastic vertical power and just
Ready to go.
Out we go.
Everything that women want to train for. Long, lean muscles. Beautiful.
Yeah, correct. All right, should we get into our scripted questions?
Yeah, right.
I gotta get back
Actually,
to work.
just quickly,
Yeah,
are you? Yeah. Wait, we'll wrap this up in a sec.
No, we don't
have
to
you
wrap
been
it up.
watching
I'm
Pat
just
Davidson's
prepping.
Power Hour since he got out of the bloody Bill Hartman thing?
I haven't.
Did you
but
know that
I've
there's
been
only a
sent few
transverse
videos.
plane?
What was that,
Did
sorry?
you know that there's only one plane of movement now? We're
Transverse?
throwing out frontal and sagittal. They don't exist.
No, so Bill Hartman has a lot of. He's just got a very abstract way of viewing the body.
It's so
And
it's very interesting.
very interesting.
Yeah.
He's influenced a lot of people. I spent 10 days at iFast with him after my Cressey internship, and he's got an incredible way of looking at the human body, and he's influencing a lot of people, and he has influenced a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I think it almost like you need to sit with him and for him to explain it, because sometimes when it gets washed down, it
Even
just sort of
Pat, when he's drawing his semicircle of truth on the whiteboard, he was like, he was fucked. He was like breathing. He was like, inhale up the top, exhale, and he was like, wait, give me a second. Maybe it's the other way around. Like even he seems a bit bamboozled at the moment.
They're abstract. It's an abstract way of looking at human movement and the human body. But Bill Hartman is incredible.
Yeah,
absolutely incredible. I think he's worth his weight in gold for sure.
Nice.
All right, let's get into the scripted questions.
Because I know this is going to be very. I have a feeling this is going to be very AFL dominant. Top 5. Might be wrong.
Don't pigeonhole
Not at
it.
all.
Not at all. Okay, all right. Top 5 favorite athletes of all time.
Ziz.
Number 1 is LeBron James.
Damn it.
Ziz. Ziz not.
R.I.P.
This is a god. He's not an athlete. Number 1 would be LeBron James, without a doubt, in my mind. I like to see. I like to witness history. I really enjoy that from a sporting standpoint, and I really do believe that we have witnessed probably one of the best ever.
People don't let you
all
have
time.
it though. Like I hate this idea that like no one lets any current day athlete be the GOAT. Everyone wants it to be like the guy that we're not seeing and witnessing it live now. Like people won't let you enjoy LeBron properly until 10 years
It's
after
only
he
in certain
retires.
sports. Like Kevin Mayer,
Boxing,
everyone's
I
letting
reckon,
you,
is one,
yeah.
but I would say basketball is another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But soccer, everyone's accepting of Ronaldo and Messi.
Maybe.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see in like 20 years' time when it's all done and we can see the full picture of what they've achieved, to see just where they sit. I'm biased. I think LeBron is the best of all time. Just from a pure stats perspective of what he's doing and what he has done and how long he's done it for. Yeah, I love him. Absolutely love him.
We'll see how Space Jam 2 goes. That'll probably have the greatest
that's the
impact
defining
on
factor.
solidifying the legacy.
Influence.
Yeah.
That is a big influence.
That and if he
for sure.
plays with is he the one that he might be playing with his son in a few years?
Yeah. There's potential.
That's outrageous.
Really?
Yeah.
How
Bronny.
old?
I think he
LeBron Jr.
Yeah. Bronny. I think he might be 17 this year.
Because he's a freak too.
He is a freak.
But imagine getting to put it on your son in front of millions of people being like, still got it.
Yeah. No, they'll figure it out, the Lakers, so they can play together for sure. It'd be like, you can't
do it
write
once.
that. You
They'll
can't
do it
write that
once,
shit.
Yeah, they'll make it so that you can do it once. I think I heard him say that he regrets calling his son LeBron. He said, I've put too much pressure on him,
That's funny.
which is fair enough because, big shoes to fill.
Yeah.
Some of the biggest shoes. But yeah, LeBron James, by a country mile, is my favorite athlete ever of all time. Some of the other guys on my list would be someone like a Roger Federer.
Yeah, nice.
Again, just because of history. I don't know, Nadal is getting close and
Well, he's only one win off him.
yeah, I know, because he's won like 58 fucking French Opens.
Clay. But the thing is, like, no one
exactly.
thinks, like, I don't think Nadal's close, but he's super close.
Yeah, but then even Djokovic is like 16 or something.
Yeah.
So, like, and for those three to win so many at the same time is like, there's been no one else in tennis for like fucking 10
There's
years.
no new
Like,
blood. Yeah, I think there's that kid from Cyprus who has a YouTube channel popping off, but I think that's just because he's hot and got long hair. I
Murray
don't know if he's actually
tried
hanging
to
with him.
sniff around.
Murray was around for a
He
bit.
held
yeah.
down 4th place solidly.
He was he was the best bridesmaid. He was like a bridesmaid. He was just always always there, but never celebrated in the same sense. But yeah, Roger Federer will definitely be there. Usain Bolt I had on my list. For obvious reasons as well. Again, I just like the big guys are the guys that I like to watch.
You got Phelps on your list?
Yeah, you got Phelps in there?
I didn't have Phelps on there.
He sucks.
I love Phelps. He's the go, mate. He would wallop Usain in a game of golf.
Mate, maybe wallop him in a cone ripping competition.
Oh, 100%.
Man, that'd actually be a crazy duel.
Phelps
obviously Bolt from
Phelps'
Jamaica.
lungs.
Phelps'
His
lung capacity. Fuck, head to head. You know that DZ Death Rays film clip where what was it? The Dune Rats, where they're just going back and forth, just trying to smoke as many cones in 2.5 minutes as possible. That's the kind of gauntlet we need to see.
No, it's like that Wiz Khalifa clip where he's rolling that heaps fat joint.
No, you missed this. I'll show you the Dune Rats film clip after this. I'll post it on our high performance story for everyone so you can reference it later. The Savo, very entertaining.
I'm not sure what you're following there, so I'll have to tune in for that.
I'll send it to you.
But the Phelps being like the best Olympian ever, or Bolt, or whoever like else. The thing with swimming, and the swimming thing is that there's so many events. There's just like, you can just win so many medals.
Like I said before, if there was a 50, 60, 70, 80 meter, 90 meter, and a running backwards and sideways race, Bolt would have the most medals. Maybe.
I've swum, so I'm like, it's like running the hurdles, the 410 hurdles. So the 400 hurdles, the 110 hurdles, then your sprints. That's it.
So it's maybe a bit more variability in there.
There's still heaps of variability in swimming. But there's a guy, Caleb Dressel, who, if there were the 50-meter sprints at the Olympics, like there's only the 50 free, this guy could equal Phelps's record. There's a kid that's that good.
With all the other ones.
So he's got more gold medals than Phelps ever got. He got 8. Phelps got 7.
Oh, really?
So there's potential for this kid to beat it, but only if they bring in shorter distance sprints, swimming sprints.
Mate, they got surfing in the Olympics. I'm sure they can, and mountain biking. I'm sure they can pack a few more in there for him.
Wait, so you're saying that there's shorter sprints at world level, but not at Olympic level?
So at Olympic level, you have 50-meter free. You don't have 50 breast, 50 back, and 50 fly. So you have 100 breast, 100 back, 100 fly, 100 free. But at World Champs, you have 50 back, 50 breast.
Have all of them.
And then you have the 4x50 medley relay, which you don't have at the Olympic Games. You have the 4x1 free, 4x1 medley, so on.
And how's in weightlifting? They won't even give individual medals for snatch and clean and jerk.
It's a total event. I like that, though. It should be a event, but...
anyway, I think was that your top 5?
You have one more?
One more.
I had 2 more.
Okay.
Tiger Woods, again, obvious reasons, but a bit more abstract one would be Bo Jackson. I don't know if you know.
We literally had someone say him yesterday. Blaine McConnell, the bobsledder. He was his number 1.
Yeah, he'd be in there. I just love hearing the stories and the highlights and all that sort of stuff.
Multi-sport athletes are just fucking sick.
Man, crazy, absolutely crazy, and to do it at that level and to be respected from pretty much anyone that talks about him. Like it's disappointing that he got injured and couldn't really see his true potential in either of the sports.
He's the USA's Anthony Mundine, almost.
I think slightly.
If you work off scale of population, maybe.
Yeah. But yeah, that would probably be my top 5.
Yeah, no.
For sure. Yeah.
All right, mate. So the next question is, it's called the Sure Challenge. If I could turn back time, what is one thing I would change? And let's not make it business related, because obviously we don't want to ruin all the upcoming courses.
Yep. If I could turn back, I wish I knew how to probably save money and budget better.
Someone's been listening to the Luke Tulloch show.
Did he? Did he talk about it?
He did a whole episode on budgeting. This is why I have wet shoes.
Well, there you go.
Okay.
No idea.
Nice.
But I really only learnt maybe 2 years ago, and I would have had a whole lot more freedom in what I could do right now if I knew that. Because, as I said, when I was young, making a lot of money, I just sort of blew it all. I was doing rounds and shots of 8 Jaeger bombs. Yeah.
I've always been the stingy one out of my mates.
But this is something we were talking about. Like, how many PTs do you know who've been working in commercial gyms, earning 6 figures for the last 10 years, and they got nothing to show? Like, obviously, as a person, they've got great character, but as far as possessions and houses and things, like, compared to people who earn that money just having a regular job, like, those people, for some reason, often end up a bit more financially savvy.
The biggest change for me was the Barefoot Investor book. I don't know if you've read it. A lot of people do recommend it, but I read that. My parents bought it for me, and that sort of changed it all for me. I wish I knew how to do that.
It definitely makes you chuck more money in your super.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Which
the funnel
is good.
system, and then you just
Yeah.
which will be good for later on down the track.
Yeah, hopefully anyway.
If we make it,
So
if we make it as a human race.
On the topic of Jaeger bombs, do you have a party trick?
I turn into like an absolute idiot when I'm pissed. Like, and my girlfriend, as you said, I was up in Noosa, and I've got to give her a shout out. She wants me to call her my Aquarius angel. She said she's watching Twitch, so hopefully she's watching.
Nice.
But
What's her name?
Laura Grady.
Hey, Laura.
Shout out Laura. Laura Grady?
Yeah, she But anyway, I got absolutely hammered on Saturday night, and she had to put up with my fucking 2-year-old antics. But my party trick would just be I'd turn into a dumbass, like a legit dumbass, a rowdy child.
Oh, dear.
I've done some dumb shit. I can actually bloat my belly pretty well, and I look pregnant.
Angus can do this too.
Oh, wait, yeah, you were saying that, so you can't burp? You were born without the ability to burp?
Yeah, I've never burped, ever.
That's now that's a
So-
party trick. Because
Yeah,
when you're smashing beers, you're burping because of all the gas.
Vomit. Just vomit.
Wow.
Doesn't. Yeah, so I'll
Like Will
belch.
Ferrell in that basketball movie. He can't vomit. You're the opposite.
I literally have never burped. I don't know what it feels like. I get so bloated that I'm in like pain, and everyone's like, "Just burp, and I cannot do it. I've never burped.
So
Maybe one day if you
can't-
do enough PRI techniques, you'll just have this crazy 27 years of burp just filled up inside you, and it'll just release.
It all comes out my ass.
So
I just
you can't sink beers?
I can scull 1 or 2, but if I pass my limit, I'll ruin my whole night. I'm done.
So you can just sit on some vodka or something, nothing
I
bubbly.
don't drink this much anymore. Yeah, it's just vodka sodas mainly, or gin and sodas.
Nice.
Or red wine. I do like a red wine.
We're actually down in Melbourne for my Bucks on the 18th of October, so maybe we'll swing by Strength Culture.
Yeah, I'm in
PRI.
the US, but you can more than welcome to go past. Yeah.
No,
Go by for a sesh.
we don't want to bring that tornado by there. And the next question is, if you could have a rap artist rap about you, who would it be and what would they say?
I would want probably Tupac,
Nice.
R.I.P. or Biggie, R.I.P.
East and West Coast.
I just I like the 90s hip hop style far more than 90s, early thousands, far more than whatever the fuck is going on right now.
I'll get
Come
around
on,
it.
mate.
Come on,
Big
mate.
age.
Yeah.
Fucking hell.
I can't stand it.
Bro, if you want to get into some good Aussie rap,
Yeah.
coming out of Sydney, listen to some 1-4. Because there's a lot of people stabbing each other out in West Sydney, and some good music is coming as a byproduct of all the selling of drugs and crime.
It's like the Footscray of Sydney.
I don't mind Aussie hip hop, the old Aussie Hilltop and
Oh,
Listen
see, I
Excellence.
fucking think that's filth. I'm all about the new stuff.
We're on
Yeah,
that,
I don't know
that
much-
edgy shit.
much of the new Aussie stuff. Who is it? 1-4.
1-4.
1-4.
Yeah, it's great. Mate, cops are shutting down their shows. It's it's really exactly what you need for it to start popping off.
Good beat as well. But if you're not into that, you're not into that.
Yeah, it's like that drill rap. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
That real heavy
Oh,
rap.
really? Yeah.
Yeah.
But what would they rap about? Not much. I'm just a white dude who's lived a pretty decent upbringing. Nothing really bad has happened to me yet.
That's
So-
exactly what they'd rap about.
Maybe you be the guy that they juxtapose
Yeah.
against
Yeah,
themselves.
Yeah.
And,
I just live the white lifestyle. Yeah. No,
Just
not
be
much
like,
going
this guy's whinging about his lack of budgeting, and I grew up in housing commission. Like he's got a fallback plan.
Yeah, there we
on.
go.
Fallback plan.
He's budgeting his meals, and I'm not doing much else. Budgeting nothing. Yeah.
All right, guys.
But not a whole lot.
That's all right. Is that it? That's all
Yeah,
our questions.
that's fucking good,
Done.
yeah.
Solid episode. I actually learned a lot, hence why I wasn't doing much talking.
And I
Guys,
feel like there's a lot more learning to
Yeah,
come
definitely.
from the things that were discussed today for me and hopefully our listeners as well.
yeah, when I'm not talking, it means I'm taking it in. That's why it's good that Angus is here to hit those heavy hitting questions.
Yeah, well, they're not heavy hitting. Jamie just fucking is like, pah.
Yeah.
I
Easy.
think the biggest thing, because a lot of people will be in the same position, try and get through the cloud of what they're trying to sell and just think
Just
of the
principles.
principles. What are they actually telling me here? How is this affecting movement? What is like that? That's the key. sort of thing to try and understand. It takes a little bit of time to sort of understand how to look at it in that way, but that's the big thing, because PRI is on the rise, particularly in Australia. There's a lot more people talking about it, which is cool, but it can get a bit, whoa, these guys are selling voodoo magic.
Mate, it's too late for me. You open my locker at work and just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of party balloons will just fall out. And I don't know what I'm going to do with them now.
There'll be a time. There'll be a party. The Bucks
It'll
party.
come back.
Yeah, Bucks party. We'll bring him down to Melbourne. All right, guys, there we have it, episode 148. Hope you guys enjoyed, learn a lot like myself. Jamie,
you've got a few social media
plug
accounts,
everything
also
you
a
got
thriving YouTube channel, and you've got your own podcast. Please give it a plug.
It's all mainly just go to Melbourne Strength Culture Instagram and you'll find most of it there. My personal one is j.smith.culture. And then the Melbourne Strength Culture one is just Melbourne Strength Culture. But yeah, we have a podcast. We have a YouTube channel for some older content. We haven't been utilizing it too much, but we're going to start for next year when we try to move into the education space a bit harder. But yeah, it's all going to be found there.
All right,
we also have actually one more thing. If you are in Melbourne, we have a Strength Culture Congress at the end of the year, which we've just moved to Deakin University because we sold too many tickets for the gym. So we're moved to a bigger space.
Venue upgrade.
Big time. It's
How
crazy,
exciting.
Actually. So we're in a lecture hall. I booked it for the 23rd of November, which is really, really cool. So we're looking to hopefully get 100 people there, which will be sick. So if you are in Melbourne and you're interested in what we do and some of the stuff that we promote, please check that out.
And mate, if you outgrow that, there's about 37,000 seats behind us, so maybe that'll be the next one.
We've got the connection.
We've got the connection.
That's crazy. Imagine that. Imagine selling out a stadium for somebody to talk about bloody hip mechanics.
Kelly Starrett would do it.
Mate, fucking Roosters
there would be a few people that could do it, but yeah.
Roosters South can't even sell it out in a minor final, so maybe they could.
Maybe we are the secret. Strength coaches are the secret.
All right, guys, there it is, episode 148 in the can. Make sure you check out Jamie and, show him some love, mate. Thanks again for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Bye.